Welcome to this video on writing the short answer question response. I hope you'll refer back to this video as often as necessary this year so that you can assure yourself of writing the best responses to these questions, which, to be honest with you, I think students by the end of the year find to be pretty easy. This is something that we're going to start the year with. We're going to be writing them pretty often and consistently. Most years, every unit test includes a short answer, and then we do a few more here and there to practice. So by year's end, by the time you take the exam, you've probably written 15 to 20 of these and feel pretty confident. So as we get started here, what I want to do is give you a little overview of the AP exam format. I think I've shared this with you in previous videos, and then we'll place the short answer questions within that. So the AP exam in U.S. history has, they say, two parts, each of which is broken into two parts. So we'll say 4 parts. And you start with the multiple choice portion of the exam. 55 stimulus-based questions, 55 minutes. That turns out to be plenty of time for students. And that's weighted at 40%. So it's of these 4 sections, it's easily the most important part. And again, I can say with confidence that my students have done very well on this part of the exam. We get a lot of practice with it throughout the year. Shortly after the multiple choice, there's a very short break. Then you transition to the beginning of the writing, and that is the short answer questions. So that's what we're focusing on in this video. There are 4 short answer questions that you are given, each of which contains 3 parts. So every short answer you ever write, you'll kind of be doing 3 distinct things. But you are not writing all 4 responses to all 4 questions. The first and the second ones are required. You will write responses to those. And then you will choose either the third or the fourth to answer. They're going to be very similar. And you just pick the one you feel more comfortable with. We're going to look more in depth at the types of short answer questions in just a minute. But I want you to be aware that the short answer portion is 20% of the overall exam. So if you kind of do the math on that, that makes each question like 6 to 7% of your exam score. So, when you think about it, that's a sizable chunk. A very poor performance, like taking a 0 on one short answer question, will make it a little bit challenging now to get a 5. It's still possible, but the room for error really gets tight. So that's why we want to make sure we do well on these. The time limit is 40 minutes. It's a free-flowing 40 minutes, so you will have 40 minutes to write all 3. If you spend, it's about 13 minutes per question. If you spend 15 on the first one, that's fine. It just leaves you a little less time for the other 2. And as I'm going to stress all year, we want to take advantage of all the time given us. So I think students do find that the time limit for the short answer questions is just enough. Rarely are they sitting there with a lot of time to spare. So when we do these in class, I usually do give you maybe 13 minutes to kind of get you used to that pace. From there is a break. And then you sit down for the last part of the exam, which is the 2 essays. And we're going to discuss these, of course, later on in the year. The first one you write is the document-based essay, or the DBQ. That's weighted at 25%. There's just one essay question. That is the one you will respond to. And I say approximately 60 minutes because both essay questions, you're given a total of 100 minutes to write. It's up to you to break that up. They recommend about 60 minutes for the DBQ, 40 for the long essay. And I think that's about right. But again, if you spend 5 more minutes with the DBQ, that's okay. Just 5 less for the long essay. The last part, what they call the long essay, I really think it's a short essay. They give you 3 very similar questions. You choose only one of them. And they're very similar in terms of the skills you're being asked to show and kind of the element of history. They probably all 3 would be of a political nature or an economic nature. What distinguishes the 3 questions is the time period. One is usually fairly early in history, one's kind of the middle, and one's more modern. So, students tend to like certain eras of history or feel more confident in certain eras. You get to choose which era you want to write about. All right, so this video is about the short answer questions. Got two things going on this slide. First, on the left, we're looking at the different types of questions. So you're going to see several examples of each type throughout the year, including one in this video, and then you'll be writing one of your own very soon. The first question, I believe it's always this way, but the first question is what they call a secondary source type. What they're going to give you is two separate, kind of like paragraph long excerpts from a secondary source. So I hope maybe we should review, but I hope you know the difference between a primary and a secondary source. A secondary source is basically an historian's interpretation of the past. It's someone writing about a past event, but not someone who had lived or experienced it. So, these are almost always prominent historians of the era who they choose here. You may not recognize the names of them. I may not recognize the names of them sometimes, but these are people who have studied this period in the past, and who've, in a book usually, or a major paper, they have made a claim on the past. They've given an interpretation. Essentially, that's what you're going to be doing in essays, not in the short answer questions, but in the essays, you're going to be making a claim on the past. So it's good exposure to, how historians interpret the past. So in this type of question, they're going to give you two historians who have two different takes on a past historical event or era. And one of the things you're going to do is see if you can recognize their thesis, their take, and how they're different. And then you're going to use your knowledge of that event to pull up some specific historical evidence, something that happened that would support either of their claims. Well, both of their claims. You're going to have to do it for each of them. So give you a generic example here. Let's say you're reading two historians who have different interpretations of what really caused the Civil War. One of them is maybe making the claim that it was all about slavery. That's what it was about, and I would probably tend to agree with that claim. But maybe another historian is saying, it's more complex than that. There had been issues of federal power versus states' rights that go way back to the beginning, all the way back to the Constitutional Convention or the Articles of Confederation. And those issues had never really been resolved. And slavery was just the most prominent issue at the time that kind of brought everything to a head. So, kind of two conflicting views there. Your job would be to say, I see the difference in their claims. And then you would need to come up with specific historical evidence that could support each claim. So for the historian who's claiming it's all about slavery, you might cite something like John Brown's raid, where John Brown tried to lead a slave revolt right before the Civil War broke out, and the way the South reacted to that. And you might say that kind of proves that slavery was the issue at the time of the Civil War, something like that. For the other historian, you might go back a few decades and mention that we almost went to civil war during something called the nullification crisis, where it really was a battle between federal power and states' rights, not over slavery, but actually over a tariff law that had been passed. So you could say, see, that historian was right, and here's proof. Your job there is to use specific historical evidence, just one thing that shows history, and you can kind of see where these historians are coming from. So, those types that type of SAQ probably seems a little intimidating, especially now before you have a good grasp of history. But I really don't think they're that bad. And I think students feel like, I can do this. I'm given a lot. I just need to, my mind gets triggered and I think of things to support it, and I'm fine. And so that's the first type. you might see. The second type is now based on a primary source, an actual document from the past that was created in the moment or by someone who was experiencing something. It's not an interpretation of the past necessarily. It could be, but it's a document from that era. These documents could be text, they could be written words, could be a photograph, could be a political cartoon. I've actually seen charts and graphs, data tables, could be a map, could really be anything. And then you're asked some questions to do with it. Usually the first question has to do with perspective. What is this document trying to tell you about the past? So again, it's kind of an interpretation. And then you might be asked to apply your knowledge of history to it. So that's one that we're going to need to see examples of, and we will. But again, not too bad. The last type, so remember there's a third and a fourth, and they're usually similar, and then you just pick one. The difference is the time period. So the number 3 is usually from earlier history, 1491, pre-Columbus, to 1877, which we usually use to mark the end of the Reconstruction era, right after the Civil War. And then the other one starts with kind of the end of the Civil War and goes to almost modern day. So you again decide which period of history am I more comfortable with, and you respond. These, it would be hard to tell you what they look like because there's so much range here, flexibility in terms of how they might ask it. But I usually call these the straightforward type. There's no passage, no image, no primary or secondary source, no stimulus for you. It's just a straightforward question about the past, or 3 questions about the past, and you're using your knowledge of the past to answer them. These are probably the simplest in terms of nature. The question is just how confident are you in your knowledge of that time period. So the one I'm going to share with you in this video is of the straightforward type. And if you noticed, if you looked at the dates for each type, our Unit 1, which is 1491 to about 1754, the only type of question they can give you for that era is this straightforward type. So I actually have several examples of these for our Unit 1, and that's all we'll focus on to start. Then we'll get into those other types. But if you look at the right side of the screen, each question within a short answer is going to ask you to use one of 3, what they call historical reasoning skills. Don't worry about what these are called in terms of reasoning skills. Just be aware of the 3 types. And if you've taken really any history course before, but especially if you've taken AP World, or maybe in my honors American history class, you became exposed to these different skills, and maybe even more than these 3. They all involve the letter C, so that can sometimes make it hard to remember them. But the types are comparison, causation, and then what we call continuity and change, often nicknamed SAQ. So we'll do this briefly, but I'm going to keep coming back to this throughout the year. In a comparison question, and what's important about these reasoning skills is that we don't just use them or apply them in short answer questions. You will also be using and applying these skills in your essays. So it really is helpful to get this down and be very comfortable and confident that you know what these types are and what they're asking you to do. And then again, we'll practice quite a bit. So comparison means you're comparing 2 things. So whether they are different historical events or eras or different perspectives on the past, various developments in history, you're going to be looking for how these 2 things are either similar, or how they are different, or how they are both similar and different. A common mistake students make, and it really needs to be drilled out of you right now, is that the word compare only means similarities. But when you ask someone to compare 2 things, it is implied that you could be looking for differences. Really, to say compare and contrast is actually a little bit redundant. Um, to compare is to look for similarities and differences. And I'm going to push you throughout the year to try to do both of those. You're going to see that in essays, you are there's an additional point that can be earned in the essay, part of the rubric, where an easy way to earn it is to show, if it's a comparison essay, to show both similarities and differences, not just to focus on one or the other. So, we'll try to do that often, think about how things are both the same and different. And sometimes those similarities or differences are subtle, but a good historian is able to kind of pull them out. Okay? Likewise with causation. Causation means you're focusing on the causes of events, but implied in that is also the effects. So from the very first video I made for you this summer, just kind of introducing you to how we'll study history and introducing you to that cadres format for thinking about historical events, I said the most important parts of studying the past are to look at causes and effects. And notice that those words are plural. And no event in history has a singular cause or a singular effect. There are many, many, many. So our job is always to be able to discuss several, but we want to do both. We want to look at kind of both ends of this. And then finally, continuity and change, or SAQ. Here we're looking at how things over time, this is definitely about broader periods of time, how things seem to change over time, or how things maybe stay the same. The people and the events and the dates change, but at the heart of it, there's still, you've all probably heard that expression: the more things change, the more they stay the same. History, we can see that, we can detect that. Good example, very relevant right now. Some people might look at race relations in our country and say, wow, in the 20th century, we saw tremendous progress on civil rights, particularly Black civil rights. We had major laws passed and huge decisions by the Supreme Court. And at the start of the 21st century, the election of the first Black president, wow, things have really changed when it comes to race relations. And then looking at the events of this past summer, others might say, nope, racism is still present. We still have racial issues and problems. It seems like the more things change, the more they stay the same. Okay, so as a historian, can you detect that and articulate not just what has changed and what has stayed the same, but maybe why? That's a big part of the explaining part, is to show how or why. I'm going to stress that more and more. Okay, moving on. I want to give you a bunch of key tips on writing these short answer questions, and I'm going to share a sample with you. As I mentioned, each short answer question, so you're going to write 3 of them. Now just think about one of them. Each of them is going to be broken into 3 parts. There's going to be an A, B, and C to each one. Can't stress this enough. Read all 3 parts before you answer. I mean, quickly, but read all 3 parts. Know what you're being asked to do in the entire question. And if for no other reason, so you don't waste time by doing something in part A that you're going to be asked to do in part B or C. But I think also when you read the whole question, you kind of get what this is all about, the bigger picture of the question. So just trust me when I say that. Read it all, then go back and look more intently at each part separately. Quickly determine, and we'll practice this, what is that historical reasoning skill in this question? You'd like to think that that's always super easy to find. There are a few. I know I've looked at a few, and we've discussed these as a class sometimes, where students are like, is that causation or continuity and change? I don't want to confuse you and say that it can be both. There's always, I always say there's always cause and effect in everything you're talking about. It's possible that it blends these a little bit. Normally, there's one skill that they want you to focus on. We've got to make sure we can identify that, and you'll see why right here. Because I think the key to writing good responses is to know exactly what it is you're being asked to do. And often students will kind of brush over that and be like, I know what I'm supposed to do. And if I ask you, like, okay, in part A, what are they asking you to do? A lot of times the student will just read back part A to me, and I'll be like, but okay, yeah, that's what it says, but put it into your own words, boil it down. So, one way to help you, making sure you're responding to the question as it is asked, is once you've determined the reasoning skill. So let's say it is causation. In the question, look for, well, what is the cause here and what is the effect? What is it specifically that they're identifying as the cause of something, and then what are they identifying as the effect? Because if the question wants you to focus on the effects, that's where you're going to earn the point. And sometimes students miss that, and they're focusing more on the cause. Okay, I need to give you an example for that to make a lot of sense, and I think the example coming up will. But always ask yourself, what is it? If you're comparing, what specifically is the similarity that I am seeing between these two things, and what are the two things that I'm comparing? It sounds simple, or it sounds like lower level to pause and do that, but I think you must do that if you're going to write an effective response. To the extent you can, try to come up with more than one possible response to each part. So, if you're being asked for a cause, can you come up with two? Uh, don't necessarily go with the very first thing you think of. It may not be a great answer. It may be something that you'd have a hard time explaining. Now, you don't have a ton of time to think and write, so you can't come up with five and then mull it over for a few minutes and go, which of these do I like best? But always try to think of a second one. And if it helps, this is why I introduced this to you at the beginning. Think of that SPICE germ acronym, kind of categories or elements of history that might help you come up with something. So, we always focus on the big three: political, social, and economic. Causes of the Civil War. Well, is there a political cause? Is there a social cause? Is there an economic cause? I think that helps you think a little bit outside the box. Instead of trying to memorize lists of things, it kind of gives you categories, and you can say, oh, yeah, that's right. There was economic factors. There was this. It's a nice little tip. It's helpful for short answers. It's helpful for essays. Two more. This is key. And if there's one thing that's going to trip you up on writing short answer responses, it's probably failure to do this. For each part, choose one specific answer. Stay focused on that answer. Okay. I cannot tell you how many times I read a response where a student identifies a cause, and before they really explain it or describe it or develop that response, they then probably get nervous and say, oh, I had another idea. Let me throw that in here as well. And so now you've got two ideas when only asked for one, and you've never really explained or developed either one. I don't believe I said this, but I should have. As you've heard me say, each short answer question has three parts to it: A, B, C. And every time A is worth 1 point, B is worth 1 point, C is worth 1 point. And there's really no way to earn those points later. It's if you don't answer part A the way they want you to, even if you say something in part B, it probably won't help you. Part A, you're either getting 0 or 1, B, 0 or 1. So what I'm trying to say to you is choose your one response that you're confident in and focus on that one response. Don't throw in extraneous information. Be thorough in your response to part A. And thorough doesn't mean you're going to write a lot. You'll see. These are actually very short responses. Stay focused on the ball. Too many students do that. If you took AP Government last year, I saw a lot of that there as well. It's a bad habit of students. Be crystal clear on what you want to say and develop that point only. All right. So again, need examples probably of what not to do on that one. This is not a hard and fast rule, but generally each part of the short answer question, so part A, B, and C, each part can be answered in maybe 2 questions or 2 sentences, maybe 3, depends on the length of your sentences. And I am, if you've had me before, you know I emphasize short sentences. Don't try to do too much in a sentence. Better to write 3 or 4 very short, simple sentences to develop a point than to try to say a lot of things in one long, rambling, run-on sentence. Okay. This is not language arts. You're not getting graded on your writing skill, your ability, your punctuation, your grammar, your spelling. You're getting graded on the content. And my advice is always to write as if you're writing to a young child, someone who does not know history, does not understand this, and you want to spell it out in very simple language. Proves to be more effective. So that means that an entire short answer response, when you add up all 3 parts, may be anywhere from 6 to 10 sentences total. And that's assuming they're very short sentences. Okay. So again, I'll give you examples and you'll see. Remember, you don't have a lot of time either. So that's why we want to be right to the point and stay focused. We're not writing paragraphs. And then finally, I think this is finally, no, 2 more. Almost always you see the word explain in a short answer question, or at least in parts of it, maybe part B or part C. Explain is not the same as describe. Now, describing is essential. We do have to, if we're going to talk about a historical event, we're going to have to describe it a little bit. Explain means that you want to show the reader how something developed or why this happened this way. So, I think this might be helpful. If it's causation, don't just say this was a cause. Show the relationship between cause and effect, how this cause had that effect. Okay, develop that idea. This isn't multiple choice where it's just an answer. Show the process, show the relationship, show that because of John Brown's raid in 1859, the South interpreted that raid as to be the sentiment of all Northerners, that all Northerners were somehow abolitionists who wanted to destroy slavery by force if necessary. And so the South reacted, by starting to mobilize against that, or they reacted by now seeing the election of Lincoln as the end of the Union. Again, you may not understand all that right now, but we want to show cause and effect relationship, or we want to show how things are similar or different. We don't want to just say, well, they're both this. Why? Why does that matter? This is where that idea of significance comes into play. Why are these similarities or differences important to the way history plays out? Okay. Or if you're doing SAQ, show how or why something changed, how or why it stayed the same, why that matters, why it's significant. Okay, that's what we're looking to do. And if you're saying, hold on, how am I going to do all that? And you just said 2 or 3 sentences, you can. It takes practice. It takes being very direct. But believe me when I say it is manageable. And then finally, some of you have heard this before. I'm not going to stress this too much, at least at the beginning. But I've coined this phrase, the wind up, as something that I see a lot in student writing that really needs to go away. The wind up is essentially what I call when you repeat the entire question at the start of your response. I'm going to show you an example of that in just a second. I believe somewhere along the way, some well-intended teacher told you to do that. I'm a well-intending teacher who's telling you to stop doing that. And the real reason is it's just a waste of your time. The reader of the exam knows what the question is, and you'll see that you can jump right into your response and it's fine. Okay, so I'll give you an example here in just a second. All right, so here is our sample short answer question. And I'm going to kind of walk you through this one a little bit. So first of all, you see it's of the straightforward type. There is no stimulus, no visual image, no secondary sources, no primary sources, just straightforward questions. It's divided into parts A, B, and C, and they all look pretty similar. That can happen. Remember, I told you to read all three parts before you respond. And I think this one is a great example of why you do that. So the first thing you'll notice is that in part A, they want you to briefly explain an example of how contact between natives and Europeans, so when Europeans arrived and started to interact with Native Americans, how did that bring change to Native American societies in a pretty big period of time that we would call the colonial period? One example of how that contact changed Native society. Part B, they simply want another example. Okay, so really what this is telling you, if you read the whole thing first, is I should probably come up with maybe 3 ideas and then pick my 2 best and stay focused on one in A and another in B. No need to throw in something else into A because I'm going to do that in part B. Okay, now here's another reason to read the whole thing. If you look at C, it says briefly explain one example of how natives resisted change brought by that contact. So what proves that Native Americans did not simply accept all the changes that were coming to them after 1492? Now, that's important because I could see many students wanting to put that into A or B. Like if in part A, you're talking about, my answer that I'm going to show you is going to have to do with the introduction of Christianity. But you might start to say, however, many natives resisted this and they continued to practice their own religion, or they pushed back against that. That's great, that's true. But that's what you're going to do in part C, so don't bother doing it in A or B, right? Okay, that'll save you much needed time. All right, we also, as I said, you want to identify the type of question this is. What reasoning skill is here? Are they asking you to focus on? And I hope you would all see what type it is. If you're thinking SAQ, continuity and change over time, you're not wrong, okay? Because obviously the word changes is in here, okay? So it's talking about changes. Really, this is a causation short answer. Now, if you're like, wait a second, hold on, I'm lost. You're never going to be asked. I mean, I'll ask you because I want you to think about it, but there's no point for knowing that. If you answer the question as it's written, you're going to get the points. But what this really is about is not change over time. So they're not really saying like, well, what was something like in 1492 and how did it change by 1700? Okay, or did it change by 1700? That's SAQ. That's continuity and change over time. This is more about, I hate to say instantaneous change, but it is. It's more like, Native Americans were here by themselves before 1492. After contact, things started to change. So really, like I said, this is causation. So I would ask you, what is the cause and what is the effect? And which of them do you need to focus on? Okay. Now, I wish you could respond right now, and maybe when we actually have class, we can discuss this. But for this video, I will just tell you, the cause is contact, right? Contact between natives and Europeans, that is causing changes. They've given you the cause. They're telling you, contact between natives and Europeans is a cause that had many effects. Now, what are the effects? Well, first of all, before you would give ideas, examples of those effects, what you want to recognize is that in this question, the effects are changes to Native American society. And the cause is contact. The effect is what did that do to change Native Americans and the way they live. That is what your answer in Part A must focus on. If what you're writing about in Part A does not describe a change to the societies, the way Native Americans live, then you're missing the boat. And so that is why it is so important to identify, first of all, the reasoning skill, causation, and then secondly, ask yourself in this question, what is the cause, what is the effect, and what is it that I have to discuss? A very common mistake with this particular short answer question, I've read many responses to this, is students will say, well, one of the changes is disease. And they won't say much more. I can't really give you the point because the introduction of diseases by Europeans is more the cause. Okay, that's contact. How did that disease or those diseases affect the way Native Americans lived? That's the question. Now, you could say, well, many Native American societies were decimated. There was rampant death. Their populations plummeted. Okay, good. That's better. That's what I'm looking for. Maybe even want to go a little further than that. You know, I always like to say to students, and I mean this lovingly, so what? You know, okay, so millions of Native Americans died. So what? How did it change their society? You know, and maybe you don't feel confident in that answer. But you know, you could talk about, well, that led some tribes to merge together with other tribes for survival, or led them to fight back. It weakened their ability to fight back or resist. It caused some natives to turn to their religions, their religious practices more, and say, you know, because this is a devastating thing that's happening to them, and they're trying to find answers. It led some of them to accept Christianity because they thought, well, we're suffering. These people seem to be fine. That they worship this Christian God. Maybe we should too. Okay, all of that would show how Native American society was changed. That's what we're looking for. Okay, so I hope this gives you a good example of why those tips that I just went over are so important to do. And don't get lazy and don't look at a question and be like, I got this. Go through those steps and you'll be guaranteed to write a good response. Okay. And then in part C, we want to show how natives resisted that change. Remember, it's important to be specific in your responses. We don't want to say very vague things. Like for part C, we don't want to say, well, many Native Americans, you know, they didn't accept what Europeans were offering them or bringing. What does that mean? Okay, anybody, that sounds made up. Get very specific in your responses, right? Okay, so I wanted to show you an example of a response and what I meant by the wind up. So this is like part A, right? A lot of times students will respond to something like part A and say, one example of how contact between Native Americans and Europeans brought changes to Native American societies was, and that's what I mean by the wind up. That's a lot of words to write, none of which earn you the point. And it now guarantees that you're probably going to write a very lengthy sentence. I don't know why it is, but it seems like students who do this, they write, I mean, that's like 15 words just to get to their answer. And it seems like those students are the ones who try to put everything into one sentence. So Those 15 words are just the beginning. There's 15, 20 more words to go. There's no reason to do that, okay? Get right to the heart of what you're trying to say, and you'll be fine. So I wrote a better example. Europeans brought Christianity with them to the New World, and they converted many natives to their religion. So to me, that's kind of the cause, contact. Europeans, in making contact with natives, brought Christianity. Doesn't really answer the question quite yet, although I'm starting to get there when I say converted many natives to their religion. So that's going to be the change. But I want to develop that more. So I'm trying to get more specific. For example, Spanish missionaries converted many Aztecs to Catholicism. That's happening down in Mexico. Still want to develop the change to Native society. How are Native Americans changing the way they live? Converting to Christianity caused many tribes to abandon their native religious practices. Okay, nothing really profound there. Really pretty common sense. I don't think there's any one of you who couldn't have come up with this idea. That's all it really takes. But notice there's one central answer here. Changes in their religious life. And I focused on, in my response, cause and effect. Europeans in contact brought Christianity, cause. The effect was many natives, Aztecs in particular, converted to Christianity, to Catholicism, and they abandoned their native religious practices. Okay? 3 sentences, all rather short, no wind up, no reason that wouldn't earn the point. All right? Okay, I'm going to end with giving you or showing you 2 student examples. So these are former students who wrote responses to this question, both of whom earned all 3 points. Handwriting's a little sloppy on this one. I know you can appreciate what I go through. Let me give you, just a better sample. I'll scroll down, and then if you want, you can pause to read this more carefully yourself. I won't bore you with reading it all, but let's look at another answer for part A, or actually I'll read what he wrote for part B. I thought this was interesting. Europeans brought horses to the New World. Okay, that's contact, right? That's cause. They brought horses. Now, how did that affect Native American society? That's where you earn the point. He starts by saying this revolutionized Native American mobility. Right? Good. I like where you're going. I want to see that developed, and he does. With this new means of faster, more efficient transportation, Native American hunting was brought to a new, more effective level, which in turn resulted in unintentional overhunting and endangerment of many American species. All true. This is excellent. This is telling me not just cause and effect, but the significance of that effect long-term going forward. Okay. So again, just a few short sentences, but it's clear that this student understands cause and effect and is showing that, and he knows that his job is to develop the effect, the change in Native American society. Okay? His answer to part C is a little lengthier, but he had the time. And if you know what you're doing, really then 13 minutes is enough time. Okay? So this is about resistance. And he decides to focus on the Pueblo Revolt, which we had just recently talked about in a video, as a sign of resistance. Great. So he says Native Americans in the era of Santa Fe violently resisted Spanish subjugation and religious influence after a series of droughts, hard times, etc. That's tremendous detail, not really needed. This drew them back into their old religion over the newly introduced Catholicism. They violently rebelled in the Pueblo Revolt. I like that. Put in that specific historical evidence to show you know. That jumps off the page at a reader who says, you know what you're talking about. You're not answering in vague generalities. He goes on to say, and they successfully regained control of the region, embracing more fully their original culture. Okay, that right there, stop right there. I'm giving him the point. He goes on, when the Spanish returned to some power in the region, they had to offer the Native Americans more freedom towards the natives' ways to maintain a I can't make that word out right now. Non-something foothold in New Mexico. Okay, but he's going on as to why this is significant long-term effects. Excellent in all regards. Like I said, he probably had that point right around the middle here, that they basically violently resisted conversion, and his specific reference of the Pueblo Revolt guaranteed it. Okay, excellent. Here's another one. I won't read this one to you. I'm just going to scroll down so you can see it, and you can read it yourself. Well, I will say one more thing. This is still early in the year. This student thought, oh, I need some sort of thesis statement or some sort of introduction at the beginning. No, you don't. Okay, these are very straightforward, get right to the point type thing. And you'll notice that he committed the crime of the windup that didn't cost him the point. Okay, so don't worry. I'm not going to take away points because you did that. I'm just telling you, don't waste your time. All right, I hope you found this video helpful. And like I said, I hope you'll come back and refer to it as much as necessary throughout the year. Be confident. We're going to work on these quite a bit. You're going to become very good at doing them. And maybe this gives you confidence that you can and will do very well on the AP History exam.